Your Total Wine & More store is ready to serve you with our always low prices on an incredible 8,000 wines and 2,500 beers. Want it today? Try our same-day delivery or contactless curbside pickup at TotalWine.com. Whether you're grabbing your favorite beer or pouring a glass to enjoy an evening on the deck, Total Wine & More has you covered. Visit any of our 12 stores in Northern Virginia.
You are listening to New Theory Radio. Theory Radio.
Hello and welcome to another edition of New Theory Radio, here live on News Talk, Saga 960 AM. My name is Nav Nanwa. I am your host, and this is the show where we theorize on all things arts and pop culture. And happy Pride to everyone that is celebrating. It is our Pride episode on this week's edition of NTR. And I'm very excited to be joined by a plethora of individuals who are going to help me celebrate Pride, as well as discuss some of the topics that truly matter when we think about Pride within the arts and pop culture world. First, for our pop culture panel, we are going to be joined by writer and PhD candidate Sanchari Sur, as well as the executive director of the LGBT Youthline here in PO, Berkha Gupta, as us three are going to be dissecting a few topics within the arts and pop culture world. The first being what I like to call corporate pride. So it seems that a lot of corporations, being that the Pride right now is being celebrated digitally because of the pandemic, are jumping on the bandwagon, are showing their solidarity with the community, are utilizing the flag in a lot of their branding. But I wanted to run this by Berkha and Sanchari and get their perspectives on whether they feel it's authentic, whether they feel it's actually coming from a good place, whether or not this means that progression is actually taking place, and what does progression actually look like. And we definitely get deep when it comes to that conversation for sure. And then we also dive a bit deeper into the culturally appropriation that seems to exist when it comes to queer culture. So it's no secret that there's a lot of mainstream culture actually borrows a lot from queer culture when you think about fashion, when you think about style, when you think about slang. And it seems now more than ever that there have been a lot of incidents involving queer culture coming to the forefront in a lot of different media, but it not coming from the right individuals or the right place, or having a lot of cis figures defining what queer culture should look like in the mainstream. So we dive deep into that topic as well. And then for our NTR Spotlight, which is a segment where we like to profile an artist or a creative or an organization who's truly pushing the arts and culture scene forward here locally in Peel as well as globally. We have Sofia Fly, originally from Brampton. Now she is one of the more prominent LGBTQ DJs within the Toronto scene. She is a trans woman, totally taking the world by storm. She is truly multifaceted and talented. She was actually named by Now Toronto as one of the artists to watch for this year. She has a fantastic story. She's originally from Brampton, and she really dives deep into her journey, not only her personal journey from when she decided to transition, but as well as her professional journey and how she was able to do that within her music, being someone that had a music background. And now she's been able to get even more accolades just based on the wonderful work that she's doing with her EP that was released last year called Rosé, as well as some future projects that she has lined up. So a really fantastic conversation with Sofia Fly. All this and more in this week's edition of New Theory Radio, so I do thank you again for tuning in. We are going to take a quick commercial break, and then we are going to get things started with our pop culture panel featuring Berkha and Sanchari here on New Theory Radio.
You are listening to New Theory Radio Pop Culture Panel.
on New Theory Radio, here live on News Talk, Saga 960 AM. My name is Nav Nanwa. I am your host, and this is the show where we theorize on arts and pop culture. It is Pride Week, so we are celebrating Pride here on NTR, and I'm very excited to welcome our pop culture panel for this week to tackle various issues involving the LGBTQ community and just its influence on arts and pop culture. And joining me to talk about this in greater detail, I have the person on my left. She is a PhD candidate in English at Wilfrid Laurier University. Their work can be found in the Toronto Book Award shortlisted The Unpublished City, Art Poetry Magazine, Room, Flair Magazine, Daily Extra, Al Jazeera, among others. And they are the recipient of the 2019 Banff Residency with Electric Literature and a 2018 Lambda Literary Fellowship in Fiction. Wow, that's a lot of fantastic accolades. And they have experience writing grants for the Ontario Arts Council, and we're super excited to have them here on NTR. It is Sanchari Sur. Sanchari, thanks so much for joining us here on New Theory Radio.
Thank you for having me.
And the person on my right is the executive director of the LGBT Youthline. They are a trans-masculine, queer South Asian that has come to consider the GTA home for the last 15 years. Most of their work has been focused on increasing services programming for LGBTQ2+ people, especially youth and people of color. Away from Youthline, this individual can be found working on community projects like a Color Deep or a monthly QD BIPOC meetup in Mississauga. On a personal note, they currently exploring ways to center joy, healing, and community in all their spaces, something they love to talk about whenever they can, and I'd love to get deeper into that as well. It is Berkha Gupta. Berkha, thanks so much for joining us here on New Theory Radio.
Thanks for having me.
Very excited to dive a bit deep, and first and foremost, happy Pride to you both. Very interesting circumstances, obviously, with the pandemic. Would love to kind of understand across the board, how are you perceiving Pride this year, and how have you been still celebrating despite being at home? And Sanchari, we can begin with you.
I'm in my shorts all the time, and I came to stay with my parents for a bit, so I don't have to cook anything. So that's been my Pride.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah. So sounds exciting for sure. I'd love to be with my parents right now. We did open up our social circles quite recently, so I'll have to take you up on that. Berkha, what about you? How has Pride been different for you this year?
I see, I run an organization, so for us, a lot of it has been about figuring out ways to still create some form of a Pride presence for youth across Ontario, which is who we work with as an organization. And so we launched an online campaign called Dare to Imagine, where every day we've been doing photo challenges and really trying to just show the rich diversity and the richness of our communities. On a personal note, it's, in some ways it's kind of been nice to not have to run from one barbecue to another to go to every event in the city. It's been relaxing. And I got to hang out with some friends in a park, social distancing. We had our 8 people last night. And it was in a park where we bumped into 10 other people who were also, so it felt a little like Pride, but definitely feeling it this weekend, knowing that today I won't get to go to Blocko and feel that energy that has become a staple for over a decade now at this point for me.
Yeah, and considering the fact that we are in the midst of this pandemic and a lot of events are going online, Pride's been quite the interesting one when you think about how brands and entities and organizations are looking to really embrace it without there being sort of this physical interaction. And that kind of leads into my first topic that I wanted to talk to you about. And I titled it Corporate Pride. And obviously, with Pride Month looking different this year because of the pandemic, it seems that a lot of companies, entities, and celebrities are choosing to celebrate, whether it's through utilizing the flag within their branding, within their colors, and are really trying to show allyship or really trying to cater to the community and sort of promoting a message around solidarity and equality. But, would love to understand, and based on the positions that both of you play in your everyday lives, how is that resonating with you? Is it resonating? Do you find that a lot of it is lip service where people are just jumping on the Pride train just because they're trying to pander to a crowd? Or is there elements of it that actually resonate with you and feel authentic? And maybe, Berkha, we'll begin with you. You obviously working with youth who are the prime demographic for a lot of these types of initiatives. What's been the conversation like?
Yeah, so this isn't something that's new. Like corporate branding and pinkwashing of Pride has been around for quite a bit of time. It's this year it's like less visible when you drive around, but I still remember while driving around last year being like, who can figure out the most creative way to turn something into a rainbow, right? Like even the like gas station has rainbow things. So it's not a new phenomena. It is interesting to see the ways that like online entities has taken on in a whole different level this year. And I think that there's value to it. And then there's also the same issues to it, which is around like often it is a marketing ploy. It is a marketing strategy to be like, we know that LGBTQ communities have money and we know that this is in. And at the same time, the visibility still continues to matter in some ways. So it's such a thin line that it does mean a lot to a youth in the rural areas and suburbs where they still don't see rainbow stickers and signs. And even like putting up a rainbow at their house can still have negative consequences. To be able to see more companies do that is useful. And also, it's a problem when all the money is just going into the marketing. So like for me, the line also becomes like, if you're using the queer community or you want to say you show up for the queer community, is your entire marketing budget just going so you can look good at a pride parade? Because that's just promotions, or in your online entities. Or are you actually also making sure that the LGBT employees you have in your agencies or your companies feel safe and actually feel like they can work there every day and be their true selves? I can't believe I just said true selves. But like are actually being able to thrive in those environments? Are you actually giving to LGBTQ initiatives and donating their money and time? So it's really about how you're showing up with that. And related to that, I'll also say around Pride gear, because we also see at this time of year, like there's a huge uptake of people putting rainbows or different things on like clothing and stuff that people buy, right? Again, is it being designed by queer people, trans people? Is money going to queer and trans people, or are you just taking advantage of a cause?
Yeah. No, and I think what you said hits on a lot, because to me, I think every major brand has transformed their logo into utilizing the rainbow, and even I was on Instagram yesterday, and Ralph Lauren was doing an entire series where they were promoting the queer community and talking about different influencers, and then they were coming out with like a line of rainbow clothing, and to me, it's to your point, I do like to see the progression, I do like to see the acknowledgement, but there's that extra layer that I think needs to be more. Whether it needs to be more at the forefront, I don't know, but I think there needs to be some accountability there. Sanchari, any thoughts on the engagement that we're seeing?
Yeah, well, I would definitely agree a lot with Berkha. I feel like a lot of it is like performative allyship. So with all of these big companies, they are definitely using it to sell their products. And even when they are like giving some percentage of their earnings to LGBTQ groups, that's like the bare minimum that they can do, right? And unless there is something much more than just like donations or a rainbow sticker, I don't see them doing any, like, I don't see them as real allies. At the same, like, for example, think about Gilead. I think that's how you pronounce the name, Gilead, but they're known for like producing the medication that is supposed to help or counteract the HIV virus. And they do give a lot of money to the LGBTQ communities, but the medicine is not reaching the people in the community who need them, especially a large number of Black, gay men, and trans men and bisexual men seem to be at risk of getting HIV, and they're not able to afford the medication or afford the insurance that would give them the medication. So what is Gilead doing? They're not doing anything concrete. So this is just one example, and there are multiple examples such as this. So I do see it as very performative. It reminds me of the Black squares that came recently. People were posting Black squares on their social media to show their solidarity with Black Lives Matter, or they were giving money, but they were like posting how much money they've given. So it's very performative, but unless you're doing something concrete, you're not really being a good ally.
Yeah. And performative allyship, it seems to be one of the biggest topics of conversation over the last few weeks, especially coming out of, coming even still to this day, still going on with the Black Lives Matter movement and just anti-Black racism. It seems that more and more organizations are being held accountable to, instead of talking the talk, you got to walk the walk. Berkha, I'm curious, as the executive director of the LGBT Youthline, I'm assuming you're in a lot of conversations with organizations that want to support your cause. Like, what do you do to hold them accountable when it comes to making sure that what they're approaching you with is authentic and it truly comes from the heart versus it ticking a box in a diversity platform?
Yeah, we're a small organization, and so our conversations look a little bit different with the folks that we talk to. We're not often like the first organization. We're not. I see a lot of it happening in the States where like there was like a big concert apparently yesterday with 5 organizations being donated to and things like that. The movement in the States just looks very interesting in the national forums. In Canada, we don't find things like that happen as much. And celebrities don't generally just show up for Canadians in Canada. So that's my little random rant of like Canadian actors moving to the States and then forgetting that we still need supports here. But what I do find a lot of folks that come to us is that sometimes they come with really like exciting ideas, right? Just recently I had a group and they were like, our Pride committee met, our employee resource group, we really want to do something. We love your organization. This is what we thought of. And we want to send you these things. We're going to do this campaign. And I was like, okay, great. Where are we in this? Like, what does this look like and how does it benefit our work? And so, and I think what I like about those conversations often is that often folks are receptive to them because it is queer folks in the organizations who are getting excited. In many smaller companies, it's often like the first time they might have had an employee resource group that's for queer people. They're like excited to know that they can actually be queer at work and do queer things. And capitalism is weird, and it's always weird to talk about folks in mainstream spaces where it's really just about like, can I wear this? Can I do this? That's their understanding sometimes. But it's nice to see how they're willing to then show up and be like, okay, so this is what you need. And often the conversations start going to, because Pride Month is the time when we get all the calls, right? June is when everyone cares about the gays. July, they're like, sorry, we've moved on to the next cause. So it's like when you're going to celebrate in June, you're putting together an event, you're trying to show that your company is queer positive, like, what are you doing? And so for me, the conversations often go to like, how are you going to raise funds for us? How are you going to talk about our work that can take us further? 2 years ago, that actually ended up with a tech company providing us work over the next 2 years where actually this past winter, they put a team of 10 people together just like they would for a corporate client and built us a new tech platform.
Oh, awesome.
Right? So some of it is always like pushing that. Like it's like many companies are open to it, especially if they're talking to you. The folks that are doing a lot more performative allyship, they just slap it on, they just make the donation from some online platform, even if that. But folks who are willing to engage with you in that conversation, there is often room to be like, well, what does this mean over the year? What does this mean as you keep going? So that's usually where I try to take it. And making them understand that, especially when we live in the GTA, I don't know, Peel is still like such a hard region and it's so hard to like still feel like queer trans positivity exists in certain ways.
Yeah.
But there is still this assumption in the GTA that like homophobia, transphobia isn't a thing anymore. Or that, look, we all celebrate, what's the big deal? And so it's also about making it clear that our issues still exist and they're very much present.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Peel because I did an interview in the air later in the show with DJ Sofia Fly, who is a prominent trans DJ within the community. And she told me straight up that she wouldn't be able to do what she's doing in Peel because she just wouldn't feel comfortable. Like there is that sense of the fact that our areas are not as progressive yet. And she had to go to Toronto and she had to be amongst the community to really feel like her true self because she would feel like there would be no support or no visibility or just feeling a bit closed up. And that really resonated with me in regards to just what we can be doing more as a region, especially when you see that we're so multicultural and you see our leadership be so quick to act or could be so quick to comment when it comes to something taking place. I have to agree with you. And again, apologies for kind of veering off, but I have to agree in regards to that. I think there's still an acceptance problem in Peel that needs to be tackled for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, talk about QT BIPOC. The group here in Peel doesn't get funded. It's personally funded by ARV and Berkha to actually be run, right? Am I wrong?
Oh yeah, we've been and through donations for attendees from the group. And QT BIPOC Saga is for queer, trans, Black, Indigenous people of color.
Yeah.
So it's just a meetup group we've been running for 4 years, where people just come together every week because there was a lack of spaces.
Especially when you look at Peel and the amount of big corporations that are here. Like they're willing to house their operations, but and to your point, Berkha, they're willing to slap the queer flag onto their marketing. But maybe there's more that can be done. Just kind of looking around their areas and seeing, hey, what more can we do that's impactful that maybe benefits where we're currently situated?
Yeah, I think a lot of the groups that are here in the Peel region are also like the ones that are getting funded from the government, especially, are largely white. And the people who live here are not largely white, like we're Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So I think that needs to be recognized. And that group of people need to be supported. And I don't think that's happening in the Peel region at all. But I think Berkha would be able to speak more to that, that dynamics in the Peel region.
I think part of it also is we can talk about companies and businesses all the time, but at the end of the day, it's actually the responsibility of elected officials and governments. And not a single dollar flows from Regional of Peel or City of Brampton, City of Mississauga, Caledon towards LGBTQ initiatives to this day, right? And there's larger structural issues of just how social service funding happens in Peel across the board. That's very minimal and non-existent, but a region of the size of Peel, it's ridiculous that our cities and our region don't feel a responsibility to fund social services. So all of the funding that we're seeing come through organizations is actually generally coming from provincial funding or federal funding or other sources, maybe United Way. But the city is beyond being we want to do a plaid flag raising or let's spend $10,000 to put a crosswalk. There's some acknowledgement starting to happen that queer trans people exist in Peel, but there's no dedicated resources or work being put towards it. It's just the same, what Sanchari was saying around performative allyship. It's fancy $200 brunches or the same 101 trainings that for 15 years, I'm how many times can we do an LGBT 101 in Peel?
Yeah.
When will the work move to actually supporting people everywhere? And if we talk about Sanchari naming pieces around BIPOC communities and racial representation, settlement sector in Peel, immigration sectors, most of those regions, we can't just look to the same model as Toronto where it's there'll be the queer organizations. That's not going to happen in Peel. And so often people will just be we just need a 519, and that's not the answer because it still won't necessarily work in Peel because how is a person from North Brampton going to go to that one 519?
Can you explain what a 519 is?
So the 519 is a community center that sits at Church Wellesley. It's an organization that is heavily City of Toronto funded for one, but also is just they have over time become a leader in LGBTQ rights in Toronto and beyond because the needs that they meet. So they're a space that people can walk in. They do a lot of drop-in programming. They have programs for very different populations. And also because they're a community center building that the city had donated, I believe, lots of community groups also host programming there. So people see it as this hub and they think that if we just get a queer hub in Peel, that will solve everything. But that's not how suburban centers are built, right? That's not how our transit systems are built. That's not how our population flow happens in the suburbs, right? So
I actually had the great opportunity of emceeing the PFLAG launch a few years ago. And if you ask me, I think a lot more support could have been given to that organization, even at the launch. There were a lot of dignitaries there that wanted, their opportunity to acknowledge the community and be able to, talk about supporting these types of initiatives. And again, it was also refreshing to see a lot of people of color in the room because the organization was headed up by POC. But yeah, it's kind of disheartening to kind of hear the feedback coming from you and regarding how outside of lip service, there isn't really much happening to really address what's going on. And again, I've even noticed over the last 2 years in the city of Brampton, they've done a Pride Parade celebration in Garden Square. Everyone probably has an opinion on downtown Brampton because of who actually lives in those areas. But it certainly doesn't feel like it's enough.
And I'm even going to speak to that event. Like, I was there, right? And it was led by what to me looked like an upper middle class South Asian couple who was really interested in was really wanting to further the cause in relation to their son who was married. And this is also the ways we see power show up in Peel. So that's mostly why I'm naming it, is that actually the first P flag was in Brampton. People don't know this often. The first P flag started in Brampton, I don't even know, 20, 30 years ago. There's been P flags in Peel for as long as I can remember.
Wow.
But the minute affluency comes in terms of why is this is often a Peel narrative, and we've seen this with white folks too, which is why isn't there anything here? They don't look to see how much grassroots work is happening, which is often invisibilized in Peel. And then, because they have affluency, all of a sudden you see an event happening with elected officials coming, people speaking. The cops spoke at it, which is just a whole different conversation. Nav, there was almost no queer people of color at that event, except for the people we took. That we were we need to go see what's happening. And then they met somewhere in West Mississauga for a while, and I don't know what happened to that group to present day. Maybe they're still meeting. But this is the complexities we also see in Peel, is that when people think queer trans representation is needed, they think of upper middle class people who have corporate jobs, who are capital G gay or lesbian, and just want to love who they can love. And so then when it comes to all of the folks who are a little more gender weird and queer and more political, and maybe want to be in the arts, maybe want to don't want that mainstream world of just love is love, we see them pushed out of Peel, or we don't see space for them because that's not the kind of gay and lesbian in Peel that gets seen. And we've seen that time and time and again in Peel. So this is also part of that narrative of allyship and narrative of what kind of services get propped up in Peel and get seen as valid, which is the look at that South Asian family starting the P flag. And who's going to go to that P flag? And I think there's lots of room for an ethno-specific in South Asian languages P flags in Peel. I would love to see 20 of them pop up. I swear to God, I think it would go a very long way in Peel. But I sat there and I was would I send my parents to this? And I don't think the answer was yes. And I had that same conversation with so many of my friends, and most of us were no, I don't think that would reach me.
Yeah, and admittedly, now that you brought that up, I did feel uncomfortable emceeing it because I just felt I wasn't you need someone who's representative of that community to be at the forefront. And I remember when I was asked, there was a time when I was at Rogers TV, and again, I was referred. The family had reached out to me because they had someone that they asked initially wasn't able to do it, and for me, I being someone who's always been open-minded and wanted to support just the community, I ran to it. But I remember having some hesitation because I felt I wasn't the right person to be in that role. And I think that's the other challenge I have. And when you talk about performative allyship, or even just talking about, we did a show actually a few weeks ago on allyship. This is when, this is a week after the George Floyd killing. And you started to see all of these individuals that were running marches and were doing things in the community, and they weren't necessarily a part of that community, but they were pushing the agenda. And to me, as much as I love the allyship, I also felt uncomfortable being this isn't your battle. You shouldn't be at the head of this because you don't understand what's actually going on with that community. You've never faced it. And that's been something I think that's been coming up quite a lot with especially when you think about Pride and, all this happening in the course of 6 weeks in regards to, the George Floyd killing, and now kind of situation, now just heading into Pride Month, and just the fact that, a lot of these conversations are taking place, I think puts more of a magnifying glass on all of that. Sanchari, any perspective?
I mean, holding people accountable, that only goes so far. Like, you still have to have the sponsors, the people who are sponsoring this, people who are taking up the spaces to be self-aware enough. Like, what would have happened if you had said no and said, no, why don't you hire so-and-so queer person? Like, what does that look like? That kind of accountability within the community where people who are not queer are aware of their privilege and the space they're taking up, and how can they personally make way for other folks who are getting erased or invisibilized or sidelined.
Yeah,
that is important.
Exactly. No, I definitely agree. And would I have done that differently? 100%. Like I think it was just circumstantial in regards to the situation that I was in, but I definitely agree. Like, I think there needs to be more of that sort of proactive thinking when it comes to these types of things. And even just the fact that, the fact that we're kind of talking about corporate pride and all these corporations are showing allyship, whether it's performative or not. Obviously there needs to be a bigger opportunity or bigger awareness put within the Peel region. What kind of action would you both like to see? Like, how do we change the narrative here locally, and how do we start getting in front of the right people, or how do we start getting in front of the city officials and getting them to really not just make this lip service, but actually put some action behind it and put some resourcing behind it, because there definitely is a need for it.
I think there are people already who are on the forefront who are like ERB. I know she's part of going to these council meetings. I personally am not that person. For me, I have started the conversation in my house. Like, I can say my parents aren't transphobic anymore. I've had duty BIPOC meetings in my parents' house in the basement, and they've known that this is what's happening.
Awesome. That's awesome.
So that's like my extent. I've written about it openly. I talk about it to my extended family in India. Basically, it's like, how much can you do as a person as well? I think that also has to be gauged. Are you safe while doing the kind of work you're doing? And the people who are on the front lines, they need to be supported as much as possible as well. Especially for me, since I'm not the kind of person who can go on the front lines, I would put all my support for a person who's actually doing that work.
Yeah, totally.
But maybe Berkha can speak more to this direct action.
Yeah. No, I don't, Sanchari. I think your points make sense, and it is really about each person figuring out what is their role. It feels a bit like hypocritical for me to like talk a lot about Peel, because it's like I did move to Toronto, right? And some of it is work-based, but my narrative is not uncommon to a lot of queer trans people I know, which is that like they just got tired of being in Peel or opportunities or whatever that looked like, and moved to the city and now come back home on the weekends to see their parents and keep moving. And that makes me sad. Like, it just, like, I think what makes me sad is that like the number of people in Peel who could do so much brilliant work in Peel that feel the need to leave it. And the loss of like art, the loss of activism, the loss of culture that could enrich in Peel, because like we're not that old a city. Mississauga and Brampton are not that old a city. And like it's sad that we've turned into this really gray, beige, gross, like boring-esque, like it's so boring. Like there is so much vibrancy in the people in Peel, but it's not like kept in Peel.
Yeah.
Even when they're living there, they still go to Toronto to do the gigs, right? And so for me, it becomes about like, how are we also making space for people who are there and listening to them? How are we giving positions? I don't know if task force and things always work.
Yeah.
But I think that the continued commitment of actually hearing and listening and creating space is important. Creating space for the richness from community. Like Peel also has a problem of always wanting to take elected people. Like if you don't have a title, you're not taken seriously. If you don't like even someone like Sanchari, who's so like well versed and has so much ways of like navigating and is taken so seriously in so much spaces. Like in Peel, they'd be like, "Who are you?" Which is like ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, what does that look like when it comes to our elected officials every level? How are people talking about it? Like, I do think that more and more people, I don't actually think homophobia internally for folks exists as heavily as we think it does in Peel. But there's an invisibilization of its existence that makes it okay for homophobia to seem more apparent, right? Like, and we see that, like, I can see the square one culture shifting, like from when I used to go to it 20 years ago when I was in university to today.
Yeah.
I don't feel as scared looking like I do or being with my partner or whatever. And the aunties and uncles will always stare because that's just embedded in their DNA. But how can we decenter those things? So, and this goes back to your corporate piece too. It does make a difference that there's rainbows at square one. It's stupid, and I hate it that it makes a difference, but it sadly does.
And I think the one thing that I've been noticing, and I'm hoping resonates with a lot of these sort of senior level people that are kind of overseeing big organizations or cities or municipal or provincial at the provincial level or wherever. That obviously the conversation of the last 2 weeks has been around Black Lives Matter, but I'm hoping that they use that as a way to think about sort of diversity and inclusion as a whole. And I think that's and I hope that's my hope that that's being done, because it's very easy for these corporations to throw a Band-Aid solution out there just because their back's against the wall and right now it's topical. We need to do something ASAP, and we need to just, be able to address it. But I hope that changes.
I just want to add that I think people need to think of queer community and also BIPOC communities not separate from each other, but an intersection with each other, especially with the Black Lives Movement, Life Matters movement that, like, I think it was 2016 Pride, that they stopped the Pride in the middle to talk about their demands. And I think there was a conversation happening where the two movements were being seen as different, but there's clearly, like, just because you're Black doesn't mean you're not queer or trans. So there has to be a way to see those groups in intersection with each other as opposed to being separate from each other.
Cool. Berkha, any final thoughts?
No, I think that was it. Right. I also was just looking it up of, like, what's her name? Was it Maitri Ramakrishnan? She's from Peel, the one who is the, like, lead of Never Have I Ever.
Yeah.
Because you're a pop culture show, I would name her. We don't have time to dissect the problems with the show. But looking at her Instagram, I can't believe I follow her, but I was like, she's actually, like, more politicized than I would expect someone to be, and she's from Peel. Yeah. Right? She left in 17 from Brampton. Yeah. And if you look at her pictures, I'm like, her best friend is, like, the biggest homo I've ever seen. And just, like, that normalization, I was like, I wonder how much of that moved into a conversation. Did it? I hope so. But and I don't mean the best friend in the show. I actually mean her best friend. Like, if you look at her personal pictures.
Yeah, she's pretty woke. I've seen her comment on a couple things online, and yeah, good on her for using her platform and using her position, because I think we need more of that, to your point. Yeah. Now I want to switch gears a little bit. We are an arts and pop culture show, and one of the conversations that's been really resonating with me over the last few weeks because of the Black Lives Matter movement has been how a lot of mainstream culture borrows from hip-hop or borrows from Black culture. But the same can be said about queer culture as well. When you think about slang, when you think about lifestyle, when you think about fashion, there seems to be a lot that's borrowed from this community. But then similar to the issues that we're seeing with BLM, a lot of people who choose to borrow from this community don't necessarily speak up when it comes to issues affecting the queer community. So would love to get both of your perspectives on this and your thoughts and what needs to happen to really instill change. Because I think now more than ever, just like how we're holding corporations accountable, we need to hold every aspect of life accountable and making sure that things are looked at in a fair manner. And maybe, Sanchari, we'll begin with you. You being a writer, you being someone who's definitely in tune when it comes to just the news world and even just in general in regards to what's going on. What's your perspectives on this? And how have you what's your thoughts on the fact that there is a lot of appropriation that goes on when it comes to the queer culture?
Well, if you're asking me if there's an ethical way to appropriate, then the answer is obviously no. The act of appropriation itself is extremely unethical. One thing I found is interesting is with celebrities, when they come out as queer after they have been held accountable for something, as if somehow that is supposed to absolve them of the problematic behavior. And I'm very specifically thinking about Jamila Jamil right now. she was supposed to be on this voguing competition as a judge, the show, and she had no connection to the queer community, and suddenly she came out as bisexual, and I was just like, okay, good for you, but you're still not part of the ballroom culture.
Yeah.
And why are you still the judge of this show? It should be someone who is actually part of that culture. So that is something that needs to be called out, definitely. Like, I feel like sometimes with celebrities, it's hard to say, are they really like queer, or are they jumping on this queer bandwagon because it kind of helps them further their own brand in some way, or helps to absolve them of whatever problematic behavior they have done in the past. So I don't know. I feel like this is a conversation that needs to keep happening.
Oh, for sure. I definitely agree. Berkha, any thoughts?
It's funny that you mentioned that, Sanchari. I just started watching Legendary last week. And
is it good? I want to check it out.
It's an interesting take on mainstreaming ball culture. I wonder how ball culture people feel about it. Am I enjoying watching it? Yes. And also, yeah. And Jamila, actually, not just that, like, it's like if you watch the show, she like sticks out like a sore thumb. So it's like when you watch the show, I'm just like, why are you here? Why are you judging this? There's also the piece of like, it's like, why you? But it very much is just like, it feels like almost like consumptive in a weird way, because she just like doesn't fit in that culture. I also think about, like, in some situations, unfortunately, it's not always so clear when someone, because sometimes when people are appropriating, it's very obvious. It's like, you look ridiculous. Stop doing that. And there's this like complexity of like queer trans communities give a lot to arts and culture. Arts and culture thrives from queer communities, trans communities. Same with activism culture. Like, regardless of whether the movement is explicitly queer or not, you will not find a movement in North America, or I would say globally probably, that doesn't heavily have queer and trans organizing at its roots. But when I think about appropriation too, a lot of the appropriation we're still talking about is still Black appropriation. And so even the article and the context that we were talking about, whether it's about talking about Vogue culture, ball culture, we're talking about language like slay, shade, yes, queen. I'll take this moment to also like amplify Anu's piece around like a South Asian party this week is happening and they're calling themselves Yas Rani. They're queer, but it's still appropriation.
It is, totally.
And like, I think that in these moments of time that like, that's the like self-reflexivity that needs to happen, not just in straight cis spaces, but also in queer spaces, because we do see a lot of white gay men appropriate Black culture and Black femininity especially. And then when it comes down to that, are they showing up when it comes down to misogyny, when it comes down to anti-Black racism? Are brown people showing up when it comes to those things? So I agree with Sanchari around like, I don't actually know if there's a line between appreciation and appropriation. I think appreciation is go see the show and spend your money. That's appreciation. I think performing and participating in it, like, you really have to do the work in the people in those communities, because I know ball culture does have non-Black, non-Latinx people in it.
Yeah.
I'm still confused by it, but I have to believe that they have done the work with those communities to build that trust with them, and they show up for them every day. It's not a one-day thing.
Yeah, and the one thing, I'm glad you mentioned the slang, because the slang was the one that I think at the time, like, you saw Beyonce using slay, you saw people using like, there's like websites called the Shade Room, where it's like a gossip website regarding, you know, things that happen in you know, in celebrity worlds. Like, you people now have adopted a lot of that language. I remember you know, seeing people on my Insta like say Yas Queen, like whenever they, you know, something good happens. Like, it's those elements that when you actually look deep into it, like, that was not a mainstream thing. Like, that was heavily rooted in ball culture. And I do give credit to like the show Pose for, number one, making the majority of their cast transgender, but number two, almost providing an education on ball culture for, I guess, the mainstream audience. But being that both of you are part of that community, like, for someone who's not, I may look at that as a bit of an education piece, but I may not be aware of just the underlying overtones of that, if that makes sense. Like, I mean, that may not be the most reliable source for my information. But it's fascinating to see even people who are into, Drag Race, right? RuPaul's Drag Race. How that's still, for some people, a view on the community, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, but I mean, RuPaul, I have problems not with the show, but with RuPaul himself. No, didn't he get outed for like being into fracking or something? I think he and his partner own land, which also like leases that out to like corporations for fracking. So I mean, there's problems there as well. So.
Yeah.
His show also has a history of being called out for being transphobic, and a lot of work has been done by trans women and trans folks to push that. So, like, representation will always have problems with it, and like RuPaul has come up at a time when there wasn't space for people like him and creating shows like him. So, like, I don't want to discount the complexities, but it's like now 10 years later, when you have all of the stage and you could do anything you want, now what are you doing?
Yeah.
5 years ago. So, like, inner community stuff, like representation means a piece. Thinking of what you were saying, Nav, around when you see Pose and it's like representation, I will say that's not my community. Like, the queer trans community is so diverse. Like, I'm not from ball culture. I know nothing about ball culture, voting culture. Anyone else, just like me, can look it up, can read about it. Yes, maybe I go to a few more spaces where people might occupy those intersections and pieces, but I looked it up. I watched Paris is Burning. I can't believe we're still talking about Paris is Burning, but like, Paris is Burning was one of the first documentaries to like introduce ball culture to the world, and it's not done in a sensationalist or any kind of a fiction way. So like, I think that's the piece too, is like, as we're consuming this culture, we're like engaging with it, if it's intriguing to us or we're enticed by it, how are we going further into understanding its history and its roots? Because with Legendary, we see it today, and it might make it seem like, look, ball culture has arrived, it's mainstream. It doesn't mean that those trans women of color aren't still experiencing violence every day on the streets when they go back home.
No, that's true. That's true. And I think one of the other aspects of this too is, over the last couple of years, I think Jared Leto is a prime example of when he played a transgender woman in Dallas Buyers Club, and I believe he won the Academy Award for that too. I believe he did when that came out.
I'm pretty sure he did.
Yeah, and back then, during that time, and I say back then, even though it was like 10 years ago, like not even that long ago, it's kind of foolish to think about that. Number one, he wins an Academy Award for portraying a transgendered person when they could have just casted a transgendered person to begin with, right? Like, I think that's the interesting part of it, is we're rewarding people to play make-believe, but for someone's actual lifestyle, if that makes any sense. Like, that's the one thing I think that needs to be called out a lot more. And that's similar to the Jamila example, Sanchari, that you brought up, is I'm hoping with what's been going on over the last few weeks, and especially with now, you're starting to see a lot of non-POCs who voice Black characters on cartoon shows saying, I'm no longer doing that because I realize that that's not the right way to do it. Hopefully you'll have more within the arts and culture scene that, if you have someone that's being asked to play a transgender or non-binary or a gay or lesbian role, and maybe that's not who they are, that they do step aside.
Well, for Jamila too, I found her interesting that she was saying that she wanted to represent South Asian folks by being on Legendary. I'm like, yes, you can do that. You're already a public figure. You don't have to be on this show. So I think it's also like being aware of what space you're taking up. Like you're saying, like getting the people who you can get, who should be doing those roles or being in those places, as opposed to those who are not.
I think the one thing that I'd also name is that, like, sometimes when we keep moving through time, it's like, well, at that time it wasn't aware, or these call-outs are not new. Things have not changed. Yes, media has made it way more possible for call-outs to happen in a way that they get amplified, and maybe the awareness changes. But a lot of these shifts that happen when people are finally giving up their roles on The Simpsons or all these places is only happening because now they know there's negative ramifications to it.
Exactly. And
that's the problem, right? Is that, like, people will keep saying yes to these things, but they now are like, wait, but will this actually make me less popular? That is the only reason. And so it's still not coming from a good place. And it still doesn't change the fact that, like, people in industries are still making offers for these roles. And that culture really needs to be shifting and changing at a much larger pace. Like, it just isn't. moving quick enough.
There's also another aspect of this where, and again, I think this also relates to all of us being BIPOC, people of color. Is there's almost the glorification of the lifestyle, like when you think about like bisexual characters in movies, like they very much come across as androgynous or very sexual, like they're very sexualized, right? And even just the whole idea of a girl having a girlfriend and her, being straight before, there's some of those overtones that really, I don't know, like maybe the right phrase is escaping me, but it's almost like they're glorifying the lifestyle and they're making it, they're almost tokenizing it versus actually displaying it in a very suitable light, if that makes any sense. Like, and it's almost like they're using it to their advantage to evoke an emotion versus actually making it something that's normal, because that's how it is in everyday life. Do you feel like that's changing? Like, do you feel like the whole idea of the homosexual character being edgy needs to disappear, or do you think it's still around?
Well, definitely the tropes need to disappear. Like, it's still pretty tropey to show like a queer character as being very glamorous and very sexy and very like conventionally good looking. And but I mean, I think it depends on the people who are writing these shows, who are doing these shows. A movie that comes to mind that I think did it really well was Tangerine in 2015, which was about a trans sex worker, a Black trans sex worker, and her little orbit. But they hired actual Black trans sex workers. They trained them, and then they were in the movie playing themselves, which was, I think, pretty cool. And it was a really, really good movie. So, I mean, it can be done. But are people willing to do that extra work, or do they just want to like have queer representation on like the big screen to make money because being queer is cool now, or it's more like mainstreamy, so you have a queer character without doing due diligence? Another show that comes to mind is Sense8, where you had the relationship between a white trans woman and a Black lesbian, and that I felt that relationship was portrayed really well, very sensitively and very realistically. So, I mean, there are shows that are doing it, but then it has to, like, you need to hire the right people, the directors, the writers in the writing room who understand this, as opposed to getting, like, I don't know, a bunch of cishet men to write these characters.
Berkha, any perspective?
This is Sanchari's area. Like, I was like writing Tangerine down. I was like, I don't think I've seen that one.
Yeah, me neither. I'm gonna check that out.
I do think representation is shifting. I see more and more shows that have queer characters that feel more complex and more depth. And again, I'm a bit older too. So I just last week we were talking about like, what were your first coming of age shows? And like, if we look back at Queer as Folk, L Word, things like that, things have changed, right? Or Will and Grace. Present day Will and Grace was still equally bad, sadly. But like, we've moved away from the trope of like the gay best friend has to be the only person and he's just hypersexualized. Yes, we've made progress from there. Are we far enough? No, Sanchari's right. But it's like, I think of Sex Education and like Eric's character in that show, and also just the number of different depictions that they do of queerness and asexuality. Like, there is more and more nuanced understandings happening for sure. And so it's becoming, like, I think at least for queer youth, they're able to see more portrayals and opportunities to see themselves represented in a different way.
Yeah.
I have no idea how that's taken up by straight cis populations, unfortunately, because I don't have many of those people in my life every day. Or at least we're not talking about, like, did you watch that queer character? So, like, my question always is that when this representation is happening, is this actually changing anything in the mindsets? Like, I thought about that when I was thinking about Bollywood and like South Asian movies coming out. We've now had 2, right? And they were both horrible. The second one was even worse.
Which one were they? Was one of them a Deepa Mehta movie?
No, these are like the new mainstream versions of straight people playing Bollywood actors. So the one was with Sonam Kapoor last year.
Yeah.
And then
you had Shubh Mangal Zyada Savdhan with that I forget his name.
You both are clearly experts when it comes to Bollywood. Yeah. I know nothing about it. So
I'm like, your audience is probably like has an overlap of it, but it's just like it's another representation of like South India, like because in India, like decriminalization happened, so now Bollywood wants to get on track.
Totally.
But again, it's like straight actors, straight cis people at every level. I think for Ek Ladki, at least the writer was queer.
Two of the writers were,
yeah. But the representation is still so like we're back at that 101 piece. But going to my piece of what I was saying, my question became: is my family watching this on their own, like they would any Bollywood movie? And is anything changing for them mentally? Because like that's really like even with mainstream representation, I'm like, fine, I'll take some of it if it's really changing any mindsets. And I don't know if the answer is yes. Sanchari, I don't know what you like. You said you watched it with your parents?
I went with my partner and my parents to watch the second movie, Shabmangal, and we all hated it collectively for different reasons.
General consensus.
Yeah, it was extremely homophobic.
Yeah.
Really?
The entire film, a film about like gay love was extremely homophobic. So yeah. Wow. And I even saw those actors on like Kapil Sharma's show, like on the talk show, and they're promoting the film, and they were making like homophobic jokes throughout.
Oh wow.
Which was bizarre.
Yeah. So clearly Bollywood has a long way to go.
Yeah. And I think any cinema or any space, right? It's like the question always is like, who is this for? And I think for a long time, like the gay character, the queer character, it hasn't been for us. And so is it shifting a bit? Yes, but I wonder that every time. It's like, who did you make this for? What was the purpose of this random character other than showing that, look, you're in with the gay?
Berkha, I wanted to go back to a point you made in the last segment about the youth and the fact that now you're starting to see the youth, they're obviously in the know. There's a lot more normalization taking place regarding the acceptance of people and their different backgrounds and who they are and how they identify. And that obviously is resonating when you think about protests, when you think about speaking out, when you think about injustice. Do you see that same approach being applied to the arts and culture scene?
I actually feel like Sanchari might be better suited to answer this.
Or anybody.
Yeah.
Can you repeat your question again?
So Berkha alluded in the segment previous that the youth is really changing the conversation. Especially when it comes to the fight against injustice, when it comes to speaking out, accepting differences, accepting who people are for who they are, and they're really sort of driving a lot of this awareness and driving a lot of conversation around this. Do you feel that same shift will take place in the entertainment or the arts and culture world when it comes to how queer representation is looked upon when it comes to these types of avenues?
Well, there's a lot of young, I would say, BIPOC folks who are, BIPOC queer folks who are in the arts and culture in Canada specifically, who are doing their little bit to change perceptions. Like this Bilal Beg, they're coming out with their play, Acha Bacha from Playwrights Press. And I've watched the play in person as well, which is changing those conversations against queer and I guess gay representations of queer and gay folks within the South Asian context in Canada. There is Iram Khan, who is of Pakistani Canadian background, who's also taking part in plays and writing plays that kind of challenges what it means to be a queer Pakistani woman. Not just in Pakistan, but also in Canada. And there are writers, like I would say one of the biggest writers would be Vivek Shreya in Canada. And even Shani Mutu, who's like writing books that are changing these like perceptions that are beyond just lesbian and gay representations. So I do see a shift happening, especially from, I would say, the second gen Canadians, South Asian Canadians specifically. But it's still pretty slow. I mean, you still, I feel like the large community itself, the writing community, or even the theater community, they're largely white. So how do we address that? I don't know. I mean, people who are the gatekeepers, they're the ones who have to make space. I mean, unless that happens, I don't see how voices of like BIPOC queer folks can actually get out there.
And I don't think enough emphasis is put on the systemic racism issues that exist within the queer community.
Yeah. I would
Like
say that the Gen Z population, like this like newer generation that we're seeing come up, they're less apologetic of who they are. Like I do see a shift in the way that they think of identity and culture. I'm not saying this is obviously across the board, but like more and more we're seeing folks, like, because we run a helpline, more and more we're seeing folks identify as non-binary as young as 10, 11, 12.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the percentage of youth that contact us in the teen range that identify as non-binary is like astronomical, right? And so and also just the ways that like their understanding of identity and culture is, I think, shifts and is more fluid. And they're less like afraid, I would say, to engage with their identities in their art content.
Gotcha.
So that is something that we're seeing shift. Whereas I think like our generation, I see more people in my generation, I'm in my 30s, and folks before me being like, I just want to be accepted and be able to make a living and survive.
Gotcha.
Right? Like there was still a lot of that. And it
Yeah.
obviously is due to the relationality to where queer rights are at and politic is at. But I don't see that in this teenage population. Obviously, homophobia, fear, insecurity, people are still terrified. It doesn't mean that they're not going through negative experiences, but I also see them more and more being fluid. They have so much more access to language online and media content, because it doesn't need to be mainstream. It's on YouTube, it's on TikTok, it's on Twitch, right?
Yeah.
That they're able to find their identities and their names quicker, and they're less apologetic about it. Like it's beautiful to watch, actually.
Yeah, I see the way they make themselves visible, especially on Instagram. I do follow a lot of queer folks from South Asia who are based in South Asia, in India and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. So I see the way they are very center stage, and they're not afraid to be who they are, which is interesting and also really inspiring. I wish I could have been that person when I was a teenager, but there was no way for me to come out as queer at that time. So,
Sorry, Nav, you were asking a question.
No, I'm I'm listening. The perspective is fantastic. Just to close this out, and again, this might be an additional question based on what I just asked. What does progress look like?
I can start, Sanchari, if you want.
I
don't know how to answer that fully, but for me, I know my work has all been about decentralizing and giving access to resources and opportunities to folks on the ground. And so I guess I can also end by talking about Youthline a bit, which is that we're a provincial peer support organization. Like we're a 2S LGBTQ youth-led organization. We do youth leadership. We offer a helpline 6 nights a week. And then the provincial leadership piece has been especially exciting in the last couple of years. We actually have just announced that we were successful in funding to do work in Peel Halton. And so over the next 3 years, our work has moving to through Youth Organize. We're going to be taking 20 youth a year to let them develop, build skills, and actually build programming that makes sense for them in Peel. Whether that's like a support group, whether that's an art show, whether that's like an education session, whatever that looks like to us, for me, progress looks like people having the tools that they need to make the change, and for us to be able to like live and actualize our lives in the ways that we want to see them.
Sanchari.
So basically ending oppression.
Yeah. I actually agree with a lot of that. For me, progress would be if you can exist as a queer person without having to become like an exhibit, if that makes sense. Like where queer existence can be more organic. I remember my parents had gone to Prague a few years ago, and there was during Pride, and they actually took photos of the Pride parade because they actually enjoyed the Pride there, and that posted on Facebook. And none of their friends who were from the Bengali community from India, basically here in Canada, none of them liked those photos, which I found very interesting.
Yeah.
Other photos were like not those photos. But at the same time, I also taught a course last year, which is contemporary women's writing at Laurier, where I'm a student, and I very organic. Like I just came out. I was like, my pronouns are she, they, and it was very organic. Nobody blinked, and to me, that was progress. To be able to do that, to not have to feel like I have to hide myself, and I could use like personal experiences from my life to like as anecdotes to like illustrate concepts around queerness in class. To be able to do that safely without fear, I thought that was progress for me personally. So if I can exist, for me personally, if I can exist as a queer person organically without being afraid of being who I am, that to me is progress.
Excellent. I appreciate the both of you for joining us here on New Theory Radio. And this is the opportunity to plug anything that you're currently working on or anything you want to spread awareness on here on the station. So Berkha, you did allude to the LGBT Youthline in your previous comment, but if anyone wants to reach out to you or have a conversation or even wants to check out the work that the awesome work that the Youthline is doing, what's the best way?
So our website is just youthline.ca, and we're just at LGBT Youthline on every social channel, so you can find our work easily that way.
Excellent. And Sanchari, what about you? If people want to keep track on your PhD progress, what's the best way?
That's not a progress people should be keeping track of. It'll be done when it's done. But I hope I'll have a book out in 2 years.
Oh, nice.
A collection of short stories, which are also about South Asian queer folks.
Love it.
My characters are South Asian and queer. So maybe keep an eye out on that.
When that book comes out, you're more than welcome to come back on New Theory Radio. We'd love to talk more about that. And
sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So kudos to you for putting that one together, and we're looking forward to it. But yes, thank you both for joining us here. We are going to take a quick commercial break, and then we're going to have more New Theory Radio here on News Talk Saga 960.
You are listening to New Theory Radio NTR Spotlight.
And we are back here on New Theory Radio, the show where we theorize on arts and pop culture. My name is Nav Nanwa. I am your host, and this is the show where we theorize on all things arts and pop culture. And it's about that time for our NTR Spotlight. And this week, I'm actually very excited to welcome a DJ, producer, vocalist from Toronto, originally from Brampton as well. She is a trans woman and queer nightlife queen. She frequently DJs at some of the biggest queer parties in Toronto and recently started her own party series called Bitchcraft. Named one of Now Magazine's artists to watch in 2020, her songs feature poetic party girl lyrics set to Latin-inspired fusion of trap and house music. And she released her debut EP, Rosé, which I checked out, which is absolutely fire, in 2019, which is available across all streaming platforms. It is Sofia Fly that's joining us here on New Theory Radio. Sofia, thanks so much for making the time.
Yes. What's up? Thanks for having me.
I'm really jealous of your mic. That's a crazy mic that you got.
It's a Behringer B2 Pro.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It costs regular like $300, but for whatever reason, the place that I bought it from listed it on the website as $200.
Oh, crazy.
Put up there, they rang it up. It went in for $300, and then I'm like, excuse me, it's a $200 on the website, and they're like, well, we must honor the website, and finessed it. Great.
Hey, you as a customer, you got to hold companies or sellers accountable, no matter what.
Sure.
No matter what, especially when it comes to equipment. Because trust me, doing this from home now, having the right equipment during the quarantine is so crucial.
It is everything. I'm seeing a lot of my contemporaries and peers, DJs, performers, like struggle to like translate their shit to digital, and I kind of came up in like a studio music environment, so like I've had this mic for like a good 8 years.
Oh, crazy.
Right, so like I already have the equipment. I'm grateful enough to be in that position when this happened. So
that's
definitely
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good segue to my first question: is how did you get your start in music? Because I feel like even when I knew you or knew of you a few years ago within sort of the Brampton music scene, you've always just been immersed in it. Like you've always been involved, whether it was producing or writing. Now it's DJing, and now it seems like you're really sort of owned your craft and you really kind of found who you are. But how did that start for you?
Well, I grew up in a very musical family. I've always been a very musical child. So there wasn't really a start date where I started writing and I started making music. That's just been happening all my life.
Yeah.
I guess when I started kind of pursuing it more as a career, it was like, after high school, I did like 1 semester of radio broadcasting at Seneca.
Oh, okay.
So I was in radio for a second, just because, like, I don't know, like I knew I loved music, but that just didn't seem like an actual career. So I don't know, I love talking, I love music, so radio just seemed like the right thing. And it didn't last 1 semester, but then at Seneca College, they have a music production program.
Okay.
It's called Independent Music Production, and the name's a little bit misleading. It's like, it makes it sound like it's only about production, but it's actually more like there's songwriting classes, there's like music law classes, there's like basically the goal of the program is to teach you and tool you with all the things you need to know to navigate the music industry complex in Canada as an independent artist.
That's amazing.
So that's when I was like, oh, like I can actually do this.
Yeah.
Like, I just assumed it was like, you know, like you don't think of music as an actual career. At least a lot of us don't. Those of us who don't like have the initial connections to the industry. Like, I'm not Jaden Smith, you know? No disrespect to Jaden Smith, but I just, in the music industry, I feel like there's such a leg up if you have that initial connection to the arts and entertainment world. And if you don't, it feels like a pipe dream.
Yeah.
You have to like get some huge rich people to believe in your which is hard to do.
But to your point, like when you hear about music production education programs and all that, for someone who's interested, like I've seen people that have done programs like that and they feel completely jaded after. Like, it's literally they sit in those classes and the profs tell them, hey, only 1 in a million of you are going to make it, and they're almost telling them, hey, you're wasting your time being in a program like this because the industry itself is so hard to crack. Like, did you ever get that feeling when you were doing it?
Yes, there were like a couple moments I can remember where a prof kind of ripped our dreams to shreds and gave us a huge reality check.
Wow.
Because honestly, a lot of people who come into that program, they're like, I don't know, their parents told them to take something in college and they want to do music. And like, I don't know, they were in a band in high school or something. And like, I guess what changed for me is a lot of us when we're younger, we see like having a career in music as like being Drake or being some big. We see it as being some big superstar, some unattainable goal. But the thing is, there's so much more careers within music, right? Like there's people producing stuff for television and film, for video games. That I guess for me is like, if you're going into one of these programs and you're not thinking like bigger, like if you've decided I play guitar and I sing my own songs and that's all I do, and I will never adapt or change like the way I do art or navigate this industry, then you're going to have a bad time because very few people get to have that spotlight, I guess.
Yeah.
But also it's just, I think the independent music art scene is totally like its own world too. Like I know some of my good friends are Canadian artists who make a living just performing their stuff within Canada. Like it's doable. You're not going to make like the greatest living. If you care about money, then you should just go to school for dentistry, because you're going to make more money as a dental assistant, but you can still make a decent living doing music. And it doesn't have to be like on billboards or like whatever. So I think it's important to humble these youths taking music programs, being like, hey, you're not going to be the next Billie Eilish, but also you could be something else, right? Yeah. Like I think what it is, it's like you'll come out of that jaded if you don't actually have a passion for it. For me, it's like there's no other. This is what I'm good at. Like, why would I pursue a career in anything else? Like,
and I'm glad you framed it up in that way, because just as much as Canada in general is known or are known for artists like Drake and Alessia Cara and whatnot, you do have a lot of Canadians that are big sort of behind the scenes, like whether they're producers, whether they're engineers, whether they're
event curators, or music journalists.
Yeah. And I think for us, like, I don't know, like I always found that interesting that like to your point, I think more people need to leverage those areas a bit more to potentially even pivot later on if they can, because I think once you get your foot in the door, it really becomes your oyster, right?
Yeah, and it still very much felt like a little bit of a pipe dream up until maybe last year for me, honestly, because last year I did start to see like stuff building. I started to see smaller gigs turn into bigger gigs. I was now working with like big organizations like Pride Toronto or Ryerson University or Inside Out Film Festival. Like all of a sudden I was getting corporate gigs.
Yeah.
And like it was growing, and I was getting press every once in a while. So it's like like as much as it feels impossible, it's not impossible if you're willing to put in the work. And I've been doing this for a while too, and it's like it took a while for me to actually gain that traction, but it's like now I wouldn't even, my mom is always telling me you should go back to school for something, and like literally I wouldn't. Like the best way for me to pursue a decent living and have a career is literally what I'm in now. Like there's no like now it feels like just like a smart business decision or personal financial life decision.
Well, especially with the stars aligning for yourself, right? Like I think that's the one thing I think a lot of people fail to realize is that when you're on a roll and things are just working and it's all happening organically, and to your point, you're doing like the small parties and all of a sudden you're doing like gigantic festivals. I think it's important to ride the wave, like ride it and just see where it goes, because I think a lot of people, to your point, do get bogged down where it's like, oh no, okay, I need to now take a step back and think about my brand and like think about who I am and be able to hire the right amount of people, and all of a sudden those opportunities like fall by the wayside and you're back to square one trying to chase them.
Yeah, no, and I had it was definitely DJing that opened these doors a lot for me, because I started just making my own music, producing, performing, recording vocals, but then I kind of picked up DJing because I realized like DJs just get hired more. Like it's just, you know, and I do love it though. I think at first my decision to start DJing was just, well, I need to make some money, I need to knock down on some doors, but now it's become like a full part of my craft. Like my live show ideally is like me DJing and me performing my own music. Like they kind of intertwine with each other.
Well, you did that recently, no? Like, didn't you? I saw your post. You said that you DJ'd a set. Majority of it was your own
with
stuff.
All my own music. Yeah, that's kind
amazing.
of the direction I'm hoping to go. It's difficult as a DJ too, because DJing is totally an art, especially DJs who like produce their own stuff and then DJ it, right? You have your like Tronada from Montreal.
He's my favorite.
The best, you know what I mean? And it's like he DJs all of his own stuff. And I guess it's just hard to navigate the world of bars and nightclubs and play your own stuff, because a lot of times people want to hear the hits. There's like specific parties that are like very geared to like where people come here and they're listening for this music. They're not here for you as the DJ. They just want to dance, right? So it is like a little balance I've had to navigate. So I'd always include some of my own stuff, but then of course I would play like Destiny's Child or whoever, because like, and like I get it too. I go out, I want to hear some songs I know. Like I get it. But like I am slowly working towards a position where I want it to just be my own stuff. And that's the dream. That's the goal.
You got me thinking about when marijuana got legalized here, like October 17th, 2018. You probably know better than I do.
It was 10/17.
Yeah, 10/17.
And like 2018 or something. I don't know.
Yeah, 2018, I believe. Yeah, 2018. I went to the Tweed after party where Tronada was like the surprise DJ.
Okay.
And I was ecstatic because Tronada right now, I'm just like my wife and I are just diehard Tronada fans. Like we've seen him live a couple times, and quite frankly, like he's probably one of my favorite producers right now in general. So the same feeling I get with a Tronada record is almost the same feeling I get when I hear like a Pharrell record. Like it's like I need to listen to what he's done just so I can hear it. And he shows up, and as a fan of his, I'm super excited because I'm like, all right, he's going to play all of his shit. He starts playing And he's a really good DJ too, but he starts playing stuff like party favors, right? Like he starts playing other people's stuff.
Yeah.
It was a fantastic set, but the fan in me was just so sad because I really wanted to see him play his own stuff. And I think that, to your point, like as you were talking, I was like, I guess that's the ultimate goal, right? Where if someone goes to a Sofia Fly show and they hear you playing Destiny's Child, it's like, I kind of want to hear Sophia's stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, that's good to know, because it means that even like the people doing the best are still like kind of in positions where they have to play other people's music.
Exactly.
So it's like, yeah. Not that hey, like, listen, I love to do a DJ set where I play a bunch of the hits, especially if it's like a Latin party. I love playing just like 2000s reggaeton, like back, like that is fun as well. Yeah. So it's not like there's not any joy in that, but it is like, yeah, I don't know. Crowds are difficult, and even like K Tronada, I feel like can now only do sets that feature like a lot of his own music because people recognize it.
Totally, that's true too.
I think that's something that's one of the things about the music industry that's very hard to crack, especially in Toronto. We have this idea of we don't like something until it's validated by some big outside source. You know what I mean? No one's going to a bar to see what the local talent is cooking up, right? They're going to a bar to hear like the hits. You know what I mean? And like, I get you, we want to hear the hits, but it's like there's not the same level of energy for supporting someone's own arts community.
I saw your work a few years ago as Fly, and now you being Sofia Fly, you've definitely been on a journey that's been both personal and professional. How has that been? And I'd love to kind of understand in regards to being able to find yourself, not only from a personal standpoint, but now from a musical standpoint, because again, when I first saw your work, it was very much rooted, if you ask me, in, boom bap hip hop and just lyrics. And like you had just a lot that was rooted in just like, maybe conscious rap isn't the best word for it, but you just were someone. No,
that's I would describe it as that.
Yeah, conscious rap.
Yeah. I loved me some Talib Kweli, Lupe Fiasco, old Kanye West, and a little bit of the new Kanye West.
But so how's that journey been?
So basically, like I said before, music was always a thing. Also, knowing I was trans, knowing I was a girl was always a thing, but it was a thing that I always had a very complicated relationship with, because like my parents were not approving of it. Like no one in my life at all was approving of it. There were barely any examples of it on TV. It's literally just Jerry Springer. Like now we're seeing some fucking representation. Exactly. And it's great. But like growing up as a 90s kid, I didn't see any of that. So when you have a world that tells you that this identity is wrong, it's not valid, you're gonna get your ass beat if you try to embrace it, then you try to like create an identity that is still sort of you, but like it like gets rid of the parts that might put you in harm's way, that might like lose support from people. So that's basically what Fly was like, because I always wanted to work on music, but I didn't think I could exist in the world as myself. So I just Fly was I like to say me as a drag king.
Oh, wow, nice.
Like how just to explain for anyone who didn't really get what that means, it's like, drag queens, they're gay men who dress up as women and like express an exaggerated version of femininity. And then drag kings are typically assigned female at birth people who dress up as men and embrace like macho stereotypes and stuff like that. So it was like it felt like something that's very put on, which I'm sure like in Brampton and Mississauga we see a lot of fake put on macho personality. I was just another, trying to blend in with all the other Brampton boys. And yeah, I mean, like, while being kind of like socially conscious, I guess, too. I like this is Fly was basically the reflection of who my friends were growing up. And like, yeah, but then I guess as time goes on and social change happens, also me realizing that I was getting more and more miserable, even though I was getting like success in my personal life and like in my music career life as well, too. Like I was making some waves as Sofia Fly, not near the amount that I'm making now, but like I was finding some success, like things were building, I was getting somewhere, but it all felt very shallow and hollow because like at the end of the day, it wasn't me, you know? I realized, wow, I finally reached a point where I realized it was impossible to be happy if I continued this way. I think for a while, I also very much poured myself into pursuing my music career as like a distraction.
Yeah.
And because that still felt good, you know, like creating music, impressing people, you know, but it's like that does get shallow pretty quick. And that's, I think, a good lesson for all y'all out there, trans, queer, whatever, straight, cis. Don't expect popularity to like fix you. I think as teenagers, we very much think that as well. And I think it also goes back to what we were saying about when these young artists go to these programs and, I don't know, they want to be the star. Like, why do you want to be the star? As someone who's gotten a decent level of attention from a big group of people before, I can tell you right now, it's a little bit much. Like, I just need acceptance from, like, 30 close people in my life. I need to enjoy what my day looks like.
You are listening to New Theory Radio NTR Spotlight.
Sofia Fly beats back.
When did you start accepting your truth, and how was that reaction, considering that, to your point, as Sofia Fly, you were making some waves, but then you knew deep down you need to start living your truth?
So there was a lot of moments, honestly. I think I basically I reached the point where I fulfilled everything I set out to do.
Yeah.
Like I had I had a girlfriend, and then I had another girlfriend, and like they were like, I don't know, like I basically like I did all of the things that my parents and my friends in Brampton encouraged me to do, which I always felt like, oh, if I just do these things that everyone's encouraging me to do, like I do well in music, I find a relationship, I found my own place, I had a car, like I had a decent way of making a living, and I assumed like, oh, then once I do all those things, then I'll be happy, and all the feelings of being a woman inside and all that stuff would just go away. Because like, again, like I was taught that that's not normal. Yeah. So I assumed that it was, if I'm feeling those things, I just kind of assumed like, oh, if that's not the right answer, then it'll just go away if I like, do healthy things. Right. And I was so mentally healthy as far as like my practices as a person, like I was doing everything right for my mental health. I was living a good life. I was finding success, but I was still like, I couldn't sleep at night. I would have panic attacks in the middle of the night. I was super depressed. I was drinking too much. Like it was, and the answer was just be yourself. Like I hate this having to navigate the world as a man. And when I do it as a woman, things just make so much more sense, and it's literally that easy. So I guess I started the journey by just moving to a small little place near Church Street, and just from there it was I had to stop the music. So like I guess there's like a bit of I was doing Sofia Fly for a while, and there's probably like a good 1 year, 2 years where I didn't do much music at all because I was just like trying to figure myself out. And
really, wow.
And even like transitioning as an artist was a whole thing too, because like I still wanted to pursue music, but now I had to do it in a whole new way. Because like before, you said the music I made is Sofia Fly. I'm still proud of it, but it ultimately wasn't me, and also it wouldn't work in my community either. Because like I liked, like I said earlier, like Lupe Fiasco, Talib Kweli, Kanye West type stuff, but it's that's not the music that like the queer community listens to, and the queer community is my audience, honestly, because just hip hop is very much dominated by cis straight men, and that culture very seldomly likes to include anyone else. So it's like I needed to find a new angle to kind of work my stuff. I'm slowly seeing the hip hop world open up to me a little bit more, actually.
Yeah, well, that was my next question, because you like I know you mentioned that was what was rooted in sort of the work that you were doing previously. Now that you're able, now that and what I love about your story is that you've been able to take that momentum that you got previously, and it sounds like you've been able to still use your musical talent to create new momentum for you that, to your point, is getting you even more recognized and some more accolades than what you were doing previously. But the hip hop thing's an interesting one because, to your point, hip hop's never been kind to the LGBTQ community, and I think you're starting to see a little bit open up, especially now that, and obviously he's not a hip hop example, but Frank Ocean obviously is a prime example of when he dropped his album, and people started to realize, like, hey, he's talking about dudes on a lot of these songs. People were. You
got the one rapper from Brockhampton.
Well. Brockhampton. Even Tyler the Creator's Flower Boy has. It alludes to experiences that he may have or he may still be having.
And you have a lot of. I think a big part of it is like the younger generation does not care.
Yeah, they don't care at all.
Gen Zers are like, what? Y'all were homophobic? Why? We don't get it. Like, Lil Yachty had a picture of two boys kissing on his album cover. Yeah. And I remember that happened, like, I think maybe 5 years ago. And it was kind of like a troll moment because Lil Yachty is very much a straight man, I would assume. Like, you never really know, but he seems, just like a straight guy. But he like did it just kind of to troll the old school heads because they already hated him anyways. And, and as a way of supporting and being an ally as well too. But it was literally and Young Thug kind of did the same thing.
Young Thug with the dresses. You had Lil Uzi Vert who always toys that line as well. Like, he rocks the purses and whatnot. Yeah. Like, you're starting to see, to your point, more acceptance. And I'd love to kind of understand, because I'm assuming you're still a fan of some of those artists, no? That you grew up listening to? Or?
Yeah. So I'm still a fan. I would say I'm less inspired by them,
totally.
I guess. That's the main thing. I'm not inspired by the same things anymore, which is also a big reason why my music kind of changed. I fell in love with house music. Yeah. As I have been on this queer journey, just because like house music is very much like the music of my peoples. Totally. Like that's music for the gays, that's music for the trannies. It's like we were talking about Pose earlier before this interview started. Ballroom scene is a huge, important cornerstone of queer culture and art. Yeah. So it's more, I'm just being inspired by different things because like as much as I loved Nas music back when I was like pretending to be a boy, it's hard to be inspired by, I don't know, I'm just not personally inspired by the words of a straight man. Not to say that they're not good, but like I think we all listen to music. We all lean towards music that kind of speaks to us a little bit more personally. So it's like I can enjoy it, but like if I'm looking for like some true inspiration and fire, I'm not like listening to male rappers, honestly.
Well, then to that point, one thing I was curious because of all the recognition you've been able to get over the last year or so. Yeah. Have you been approached to play any cis parties? Because again, it's that the lines are blurring. I think to me the logical extension would be, hey, why do we still have categories? Like, why don't we take it a step further and actually blend people's interests together? Because we're clearly doing that, whether it's being fans of these artists or blatantly the fact that a lot of elements of queer culture do get stolen as well, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's very, like you mentioned house music, like a lot of that originated from that community, but then you do see a lot of cis artists that are running with house music and really making it, a part of who they are and being successful off of it without necessarily recognizing the origins. So I know I kind of threw a lot of questions at you with that one.
No, I'm yeah.
Have you started getting cis gigs?
Yes. Like here and there, I definitely feel like the majority of the gigs that I get, and we're talking like pre-COVID and sort of post-COVID, because Zoom parties are a thing. But Zoom parties are a thing.
Yeah, they are.
For better and worse. Anyways, so yeah, I was starting to see it open up a bit, honestly. There was a couple big shows that I was gonna do that got canceled because of COVID. I did the Luminato one, so I was brought on for Luminato.
Sweet, awesome.
And there was another one that I don't want to talk about because it didn't happen, but it was like literally just some like being recognized for my music.
That's awesome.
Same with Now Magazine as well too. So Now Magazine, it's not a queer magazine. It's just it's music. It's pop culture. So I see myself getting recognized simply for the music more. And that's the main thing for me too, because I'm down to play a party for my community. I love doing that, don't get me wrong. But yeah, I do want some kind of like appreciation from people who aren't my community, because getting appreciation from my community is like, it's easy, because I think what's magical about the local queer arts scene is because a lot of us don't have examples of us in media, we look to our own backyard to find inspiring figures. And that's, I think, what has really helped Sofia Fly gain traction versus Fly, because I think Fly, not as many people were interested in hearing me. Well, in a different way, but it's like, people, there's not a lot of trans women out there to listen to their music for. So
a question I have for you then is what needs to happen in the music industry for it to be more inclusive? Because we're obviously ready for it. And if you ask me, like, I think you're starting to see more and more of these conversations happening, more and more of these artists getting, spotlighted, but there is something there that's not fully opening up yet. And I'm wondering, for someone like you being a trans artist, what do you want to see happen for that progression to take place?
So like, we are seeing it. I'm definitely, in the last, let's say 5 years, trans rights have really become like a mainstream thing, at least in North America or certain parts of the world. It's becoming a very recognized thing. But of course the work's not done yet at all. I would say that like the music industry they're trying to, like, there is levels of it that's trying, like, I think Billboard magazine has like a whole pride issue. I'm constantly coming across articles that are trying to amplify queer voices and Black queer voices, especially right now. And just kind of like, take the artists that are already out there, and just like broadcast them, like let people know. BuzzFeed is another publication that's done a decent job, like kind of making a point of like, hey, here's a bunch of queer artists that you probably don't know, but you totally should. I think more of that needs to keep happening. But the problem with that is that it's not going to do much unless we see like a cultural change, honestly. So like the music industry can be progressive as it wants, but at the end of the day, like the bars, the clubs, the event halls are going to give space to people who bring people in, right? And we still need to change as a culture, and then the music industry will reflect that, because it's still like that I think is just what needs to happen. It's like we still haven't really normalized trans people. I can tell you, when I walk down the street, I still get dirty looks from people all the time. So it's not like there's a level of acceptance, but there's still like a huge level of not acceptance. The people who matter, as far as, in Toronto, it's a bit better. That's why I live here. In Brampton, I would have an awful life, just honestly, straight up. But yeah, it's a cultural change that needs to happen. And then you'll see the music industry reflect that, because people will like be interested in what like a trans woman is making music wise. Where I feel like right now we're still very much in this stage of tolerating trans people, and we're not ready to celebrate them yet. Because that's the ultimate difference. It's like, okay, we won't be rude or outright hateful to trans people anymore, but that's like not enough to put them on a platform or whatever. And some of the cis gigs I got to, there was still like uncomfortable moments that I had to experience and stuff, like misgendering, people just being weird around me, like whatever, just weird environments, which I personally am willing to throw myself into for the sake of like taking up space. I want to like show up and, but it is like a lot of times I feel like I am the first trans person that someone is meeting. Like just constantly, right? So like there's a lot of pressure there. It's very so again, like I'm willing to do that, but if we were trying to create a music industry that is more inclusive to trans people, like the internal culture's got to change. Trans people got to feel comfortable at your shows and stuff like that, right? Because like it is, some of these shows, like like my friends won't come out. My trans girlfriends probably won't come because they're like, is it a bunch of straight boys? Like, no, thank you. You know, like, because for them, they don't enjoy it. Like, but it depends on the show. But it is like, it comes down to a cultural change.
It definitely does.
And that's like, you can write all the laws you want, but it comes down to conversations that everyone has with their friends, and we just kind of slowly create a world where we celebrate trans people, not just tolerate them. And we're like, and
I think education there is like super important.
Education too, that's what it is too. I think a lot of people are awkward around me simply because they, like, again, I'm the first trans person they met, and then they don't like know how to interact with me, and it's annoying having to like teach them, but it is like education. Like, if we learned about this in schools or just like wherever. There is a new Netflix documentary called
Starts with a D, doesn't it? I saw the trailer. Yeah, something like that.
Something like that.
I saw Laverne Cox was in it.
Yeah, so I haven't seen it yet, but a lot of my friends are saying like, oh my God, this is the best. This is the best. So things like that, and things like Pose is another one. And now you have Legendary. It's just all it honestly takes is seeing trans people on TV, seeing trans people in your workplace. Like, just, hey, we're human. Hey, we're just like out here, right? We're not like this weird otherworldly alien political topic for y'all to just like debate about whether or not we're valid. We just exist, period.
But I wanted to kind of close out the interview, and I want to talk to you about your album Rosé. It came out last year. It's interesting to hear your story and to know that music was a big part of who you were before, and obviously it's a big part of who you are now, but you took a break in between when you were trying to find yourself. Yeah. And Rosé to me feels like almost like a reintroduction. Like, I'm now, you know, Sofia's here and I'm here to stay, and here's my vibe. And I feel like since you've released that, that's where a lot of the things that you've been working on have snowballed, and all these opportunities have come about. How pivotal was that album for you?
Huge. Honestly, also DJing ended up being like a big breaking point for me, but like also the album as well. And for me, it was really big because it's the first time I got a grant from Toronto Arts Council to work on it. And also, like, again, like, I was working on that album basically that whole year that I said I was taking off. I was kind of slowly working on that album. Some of the songs on there, like the Patrona, which is like the 5th track on that EP, which has been like my biggest hit. People call me Patrono now.
Nice.
Literally, it's really great. I never thought I'd be able to like play a song and see people in the crowd know my lyrics. Like, that's not awesome. In just the chorus, like in the verse. Like, people know the verses. I'm flattered.
That's awesome.
But the beat for that song I made like maybe like 3 years before the song was released. Like, I was writing that song over like the course of 3 years. So Rosé totally was like me finally figuring out who I am as an artist, as myself, as a trans woman. A big part of it was vocals. That is honestly another reason why I took the time off. Finding my voice. I literally had to find my voice, and that it's still a part of a little thing I have of like, you know, and I know it's something that makes me stick out, I guess. This is just me being aware of the fact that the audience for a visible trans woman versus a passable trans woman is very passability is a huge thing, and I would love to just be myself and not worry about it, but I have to navigate the world at the end of the day. So like trying to figure out how to have a voice that is feminine while also like rapping, singing, and doing like cool things with your vocal. That took some time, and that took some like personal work as well too. Because again, like, but the stuff I was making before, it was super macho. So it was like I developed my voice in a way that I didn't even like, and I had to like undo all of that.
Wow.
I am now working to create something that fuses my DJing with my vocals, because Rosé was very much just about my songs, my bars, my lyrics, and it was like 5 songs, and it was like full on songs.
Yeah.
But then my Fly Beats Volume 1 mixtape is about my beats, my production, my dance DJ stuff. So now I'm looking to create a project that kind of melds those two worlds, and that's
awesome.
what you can expect from me in the future.
You're certainly, to me, a fantastic example of someone who found their truth and has been able to live it and has been able to really just get a lot of success and be able to utilize it and have a seat at the table when it comes to important gigs in the city and trying to navigate and create space for the queer community. What advice would you give to anyone who's probably struggling right now, who's trying to find their way?
Just remember what part you're playing in history. Like, I think a lot of confidence in myself as a trans woman came when I learned about the history of trans people or gender diverse people throughout the world. Like, we have been present in some shape or form in literally every culture throughout all of history. And if you look at history, the colonial British Christian Catholic Empire going around spreading these lies that we're somehow evil or deranged or whatever. And since then, that like programming and brainwashing has been a part of our culture forever. So knowing that I'm the one who's in the right here, and anybody who's like giving me dirty looks, giving me attitude, saying awful things to me is like just another sheep that's a product of this brainwashing and for some reason needs to hate people to go to sleep at night. Like, it's a really weird thing. Like, why are you, like, I'm literally just out here trying to enjoy myself and live my life. Why is that such a trigger for some people?
Yeah.
Recognize who the real snowflakes are, okay? The real snowflakes are the conservatives. They're afraid of change, right? And you can't be afraid to create it because, like, change makers are just, no matter who they were, like, it's easy to look at history now and be like, oh, yes, that person was great. But that person dealt with a lot of crazy, right? So just know that you are a change maker in your own circle, in your own community, and all you have to do is recognize that you have that power, you have the ability. Just believe in yourself. It's such it's a corny little after school special, but like, believe in yourself.
You need to.
That's literally like it's there's no reason to doubt yourself. Reflect every once in a while, but don't doubt yourself.
Awesome. No, it's a great message, Sophia, and we really appreciate having you here on New Theory Radio. If anybody wants to connect with you or wants to check out what you're doing or wants to even check out Rosé, this is your opportunity to plug whatever you want to plug.
Okay. So if you go on my Instagram at DJ Sofia Fly, I spell Sophia with an F, like Sofia, not PH. Just so you know. So DJ Sofia Fly, all one word, on Instagram. That's my Instagram. You'll find the little link tree in there, and you can go to my SoundCloud and my Spotify. If you search me on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever, you'll probably find me. Again, Sophia with an F, Sofia Fly. And yeah, if you want to hear my DJ remixes and sets and stuff, and go on SoundCloud. If you want to hear my own songs, go on Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, whatever.
Awesome. Well, Sophia, thanks so much for coming on New Theory Radio. We greatly appreciate it. Go check out Sofia Fly. She's doing fantastic things, and you do want to check out her album, Rosé. It is absolutely fire. We are going to take a quick commercial break here on New Theory Radio, and we'll be right back with more here on Saga 960.
You are listening to New Theory Radio. Theory Radio.
Hello and welcome back to New Theory Radio. Here live on News Talk Saga 960 AM. the show where we theorize on arts and pop culture. My name is Nav Nanwa. I am your host, and this actually concludes this week's edition of New Theory Radio. So special thanks to Sanchari Sur and Berkha Gupta for joining me on the pop culture panel, as well as DJ Sofia Fly for being our NTR spotlight. If you want to connect with me, it is at Nav Nanwa on Instagram and Twitter. If you want to connect with New Theory Radio, it's at New Theory Radio across all social platforms. If you want to connect with Saga 960 AM, it is at Saga 960 AM across all platforms. If you missed today's episode, it will be uploaded to the Saga 960 AM website as of Tuesday, as well as newtheoryradio.com. Happy Pride, and that's a wrap for this week. Special shout-outs to my baby brother Amit Nanwa, aka at colorblindphotography_ for doing our graphics, and of course, the master behind the boards at Dusty Loops for doing our instrumentals. And thanks again, and you will hear all of us next time. Peace.
Keep all your entertainment options centered with Xfinity X1. Access live TV, Netflix, and now Hulu and Peacock. Streaming zen. Now that's simple, easy, awesome. Xfinity X1 gives you the most complete entertainment experience with everything from live TV to your DVR to on-demand favorites and your streaming apps. Just use your voice remote to easily find what you want to watch. Go online or call 1-800-XFINITY today to learn more. Restrictions apply. Netflix, Hulu, and Peacock memberships required.
Your Total Wine & More store is ready to serve you with our always low prices on an incredible 8,000 wines and 2,500 beers. Want it today? Try our same-day delivery or contactless curbside pickup at TotalWine.com. Whether you're grabbing your favorite beer or pouring a glass to enjoy an evening on the deck, Total Wine & More has you covered. Visit any of our 12 stores in Northern Virginia